Let's talk about the Thousand Sons. A legion made up entirely of space wizards, the Thousand Sons never truly wanted to turn away from the Emperor and towards chaos. Though, due to their own pride and lack of foresight, along with the manipulations of Tzeentch and their dad being a complete and utter moron, they are now dust-filled suits of armour given entirely to the whims of the Lord of Change. So, let's explore how they got there, shall we? Before we get into the video proper, I do just want to take a quick moment to thank my channel members, Vort, Cersei, Victory Kaiser and Kraydog for supporting me, as well as ask you, if you haven't already, to like, subscribe and maybe leave a comment. It truly does help small channels like mine more than you probably expect. Anyway, on with the video. Like all of the original 20 legions, the 15th was formed on Terra and given this absolutely lovely colour scheme. When I inevitably complete my arc and become a Thousand Sons player, I will almost certainly be using this scheme, and as much as I might hate Magnus as a character, his model is really cool. The first recruits of the Legion, taken from amongst the population of what had once been the Achaemenid Empire, were implanted with the gene seed of Magnus during a brief period of warp storms within the Sol system. The storms resulted in outbreaks of madness and violence across Terra, and though it likely did not affect the Legion's gene seed, it was certainly not a great start. Among this first wave of recruits were a set of twins, Ahriman and his brother Ormuzd. Remember these two, they will be relevant shortly. As they were created relatively late in the unification of Terra, the 15th did not see much use on the throne world, before being christened the Thousand Sons by the Emperor himself, and sent out into the galaxy as part of the Great Crusade. To briefly explain the name, it is another of those foreshadowing things that the early Horus Heresy books loved so very much. For unknown reasons, only 1,000 Marines were created and trained during the first wave of recruitment, with the Legion being brought up to full strength afterwards. The name will also be important later on, but we can't talk about that yet because of spoilers. For the first 5 years of the Great Crusade, the Thousand Sons were not considered to be markedly different from any of the other 19 legions of Space Marines. They were effective expanders of the Imperium's borders, but nothing special. 5 years in, however, the warriors of the Legion spontaneously began to develop psychic abilities, giving them quite the power boost compared to their brother legions. Unfortunately, with great power becomes great responsibility, etc, etc, and during the compliance of Byzant came the first documented instance of the Flesh Change. The Flesh Change was a wave of horrific, unstoppable degenerative mutations, effectively turning a warrior of the Legion into a Chaos Spawn. Most of those afflicted were secured in stasis chambers before they fully turned, in the hope that a cure could be found, though a notable exception to this was Ormuzd, who succumbed to the change in front of his twin brother, giving Azek a severe case of PTSD. Due to the emergence of the Flesh Change, the number of active members of the Thousand Sons dwindled in the years before they met their Primarch. And to make matters worse, a number of the other Legion's daddies found the existence of psychic mutants distasteful. These detractors, mainly Mortarion, Dawn and Corvus Corax, began variously to move for censure of the Thousand Sons, or to spread rumours and condemnations about them. As the years passed, they had managed to gain enough support to propose that the 15th Legion be disbanded and expunged from Imperial records altogether, like the two Lost Legions. Fortunately, it was shortly after this that the Legion arrived at Prospero and found their Gene Father. Unfortunately, that Gene Father was Magnus the Red. Stranded on the remote world of Prospero during the scattering of the Primarchs, Magnus was unique amongst his brothers, as he was entirely aware of his own birth and development, and remembered his infancy on Terra vividly. He also regularly psychically communed with Emps, both during his incubation on Terra and while he was growing up on Prospero, before they were officially reunited. Completely due to luck, and definitely not Tzeentch doing Tzeentch things, the planet that Magnus happened to land on was a world of outcast human psykers, who could tutor Magnus and help him develop his powers. Chief amongst his mentors was Ammon, and due to their knowledge, Magnus outstripped each of his teachers within less than a year of study, culminating in him leading a campaign to purge the Psych Nuin from Prospero, a breed of warp creature that fed on psykers. With the world's main threat removed, and under the leadership of Magnus, many of Prospero's cities were rebuilt, becoming renowned for their beauty and splendour. At the same time, the population of Prospero set up schools of thought to explore, document and enhance their psychic abilities, which would later become the cults of the Thousand Sons, each specialised in a specific area of psychic power. Due to his presence in the warp, as well as their previous email communications, it did not take long for the Emperor to find Magnus and bring him to his legion. For his part, Magnus took to his sons immediately, and began training them in the ways of the Psyker, and introducing them to the concepts of the Prosperine cults. He also formed a strong bond with his father, and the two of them often travelled the warp together, though Big E repeatedly stressed the dangers of looking too deep into the Empyrean. This is something of a theme with Magnus. He was repeatedly bashed over the head with the idea that while the warp is a tool to be used, it is a tool to be used carefully. Emps warned him, Ammon warned him, the Space Wolves warned him, Sangi and the Khan warned him, even a Tzeentch demon warned him. But did he listen? Fuck no. Every single one of these warnings was met with some variation of, I can see why you, a dumbass, would be worried about that. But I, Magnus the Red, smartest man alive, am simply too big-brained for that to be a problem for me, Magnus the Red, smartest man alive. This all culminated in Magnus making a, later revealed to be failed, bargain with Tzeentch in order to save his sons from the flesh change. Now, in fairness, he didn't know it was Tzeentch at the time, but you'd think after the literally countless number of warnings he had been given, he would have been a little bit more careful. Anyway, the bargain cost Magnus his eye, but for a time the flesh change did appear to recede from the Legion, though only 1,000 Thousand Sons remained at the time. Get it? It's all a big cycle. With the flesh change halted, at least for now, the Thousand Sons were able to rebuild their numbers from the population of Prospero, and return to the Great Crusade with Magnus at their head. They would, however, remain on the smaller side of the Crusade-era legions. When Magnus took command of the Legion, he enacted a number of organisational changes to what had previously been a pretty bog-standard Legion of Astartes. Instead of chapters, the Thousand Sons had fellowships, of which there were 9. No prizes for guessing whose favourite number 9 is. Just as an aside, this whole part of Magnus's story is a reference to Odin, who gave up his eye for knowledge and hung for 9 days. The Legion also had 2 special units, the elite Scarab Occult Terminators, who are definitely among my favourite models in the entire tabletop. I mean, look at the chunky little ancient Egyptian guys. And the Hidden Ones, the Scout Auxilia led by Ammon from earlier. They also had the Rahati, or Coven of Magnus, a secondary command structure in which the Legion's senior officers were ranked in order of psychic ability and influence. The newly restructured Thousand Sons did a decent enough job at bringing worlds into compliance, though they did so mainly using diplomacy and trickery rather than outright conquest, due to both their small size and their generally higher consideration for human life and knowledge, which was one of Magnus's better qualities. However, as the Great Crusade widened in scope, and more hostile psykers were encountered, mistrust of the seemingly similar Thousand Sons deepened, this time led by Mortarion and Leman Russ. This all came to a head at the Council of Nikaea, which sought to put an end to the debate of whether or not an Astartes legion should use psykers. It is also, in my opinion, Magnus's greatest failing. Originally, both Sanguinius and the Khan were on Magnus's side, as they both made use of psykers and recognised their value. However, despite this, they were still wary of the warp, and warned Magnus about it on numerous occasions, leading to him again saying that he was way too smart to have to worry about any of that. He was so confident and so self-assured that he could do no wrong that the Khan pretty much abandoned him at Nikaea. Afterwards, at said council, after being confronted by reasonable and well-thought-out arguments against psykers, Magnus decides that his best course of action is to retell the allegory of Plato's cave, but change the ending to suit his argument. Predictably, this staggering display of arrogance does not go down too well, and the Emperor himself announced that no Astartes must ever again employ psychic powers, upon pain of destruction. Incidentally, this is the second time that a Primarch used Plato's cave in an argument, which is quite interesting. Oh, and Magnus also wiped Ahriman's memory after he found out that his father had indeed known that there were dangers hidden in the warp, and made a bargain with one anyway. Following the council, the Thousand Sons effectively withdrew from the Crusade and returned to Prospero. Did they and Magnus listen to the judgment of the Emperor and stop using their psychic powers, I hear you ask? What a stupid question, of course they didn't. Magnus foresaw the approaching Horus heresy and used both his own powers and those of his sons in an attempt to save his brother's soul, though this failed due to the influence of Erebus and his poop knife. Having failed to save Horus, Magnus instead decides that he needs to warn the Emperor of his betrayal, which, to be fair, is a reasonable stance to take. What is not reasonable, however, is how he decides to warn the Emperor. Instead of sending a ship, or I don't know, like an email or something, Magnus decides that the only way he could possibly get a message to Emps is by astral projecting inside the throne room. You know, using those powers he'd literally just been banned from using. However, he couldn't get to the Emperor, as there was some sort of psychic barrier around Terra. Now, obviously we know that this was the Webway project, but Magnus hadn't been told of that, so we can't really blame him for not knowing. Even then, though, you'd think that maybe he would see this massive wall that had appeared around Terra and think, maybe this is important. He tries to break through it, fails, and then gets approached by an immensely powerful warp entity that is very clearly Tzeentch, who gives him the power to break into the Webway, get into the throne room, and have a chat with a fairly miffed version of the Emperor. The whole heresy could have been avoided, humanity could be living all cushy inside the Webway, and Emps could still be walking around off the throne, if Magnus had taken a second to consider that maybe, just maybe, the Emperor of Mankind had a plan he hadn't thought of. Anyway, having destroyed the Webway and humanity's future, Magnus was in bad books with Big E, who sent Lehman and the Space Wolves off to Prospero to bring him back to Terra for censure. Unfortunately for the Thousand Sons and Magnus's back, Horus received word of this fleet and sent a message to Lehman, convincing him that returning Magnus to Terra was a waste of time, and he should instead simply kill him and wipe out his legion. Magnus, for his part, was finally confronted with the knowledge that he wasn't the smartest person in the universe, that he didn't understand the warp as well as he thought he did, and that some people, like the guy who literally created him, who would have thought, had plans that he didn't know about. Realising that he had shattered the Emperor's dream of uniting humanity within the Webway, and was responsible for the deaths of everyone currently fighting to keep hordes of demons out of the throne room, Magnus decided that he would simply wait and accept whatever punishment the Emperor deemed necessary. He sent the Thousand Sons fleet away from Prospero, shut down the orbital defences of the planet, and wrapped Prospero in a psychic bubble that prevented communications and psychic visions beyond its boundaries, leading to the Space Wolves catching the planet completely by surprise. Tragically, without the interference of Horus, This would have led to Magnus being brought to Terra without bloodshed, and probably would have seen the Webway project salvage, as he could be placed on the throne to keep the palace secure, while Emps pottered about doing other things. But Horus did interfere, and the legionaries of the Thousand Suns, along with the planetary defence forces of Prospero, did not share Magnus's acceptance of defeat, and resolved to defend the planet as best they could. They managed to hold Tizca, the capital city, for a time, though the assault of the Good Boy Legion and their Primarch, along with the forces of the Sisters of Silence and Adeptus Custodes, eventually overwhelmed their defences. The Flesh Change also returned during this battle, as the warriors of the Thousand Suns overtaxed themselves in an effort to defend their home. Seeing that his legion would be wiped out if he continued to do nothing, Magnus eventually pulled his finger out and joined the battle, engaging Russ in a duel that ended with Russ executing a perfect 10 out of 10 no-note backbreaker on the Crimson King. In response, Magnus finally, willingly accepted the help of Tzeentch, and fled with his legion to the Eye of Terra, to the aptly named Planet of Sorcerers. After their escape from Prospero, the Thousand Suns had once again been reduced to only 1,000 living Astartes, though by the time of the Siege of Terra they had recovered to somewhere around 9,000. As a legion, they had little impact on the greater course of the heresy, with fragmented and individual warbands fighting on both sides of the conflict. The main bulk of the legion, those who remained within the Eye of Terra, found that Magnus had been broken into shards following his duel with Leman Russ, and Ahriman's Cabal devoted much of their time to rediscovering these shards and restoring their Primarch. Ultimately, they were able to find nearly all of the shards, though one remained hidden on Terra, the shard that Magnus believed was the ultimately good portion of his soul. The recovery of this shard was the main focus of the Thousand Suns during the Siege of Terra, as Magnus had intentionally kept his legion out of the main line of fighting in order to potentially wrest control of Terra from whichever side emerged victorious. Because of this, the Thousand Suns present during the siege were mostly responsible for summoning demonic reinforcements and casting support spells, rather than engaging in the fiercest fighting. While the main battle was taking place, Magnus and a small group of Thousand Suns, including Ahriman, infiltrated the palace to recover the lost shard, though after learning it was no more consequential than any other shard of his soul, and was now beyond his reach anyway, and also losing a game of chess, Magnus instead killed Malcador, and decided he would also slay the Emperor. Thanks to the intervention of Vulcan, alongside a small group of salamanders and space wolves, this attempt would fail, and Magnus would get his shit pushed in before giving himself up fully to the powers of chaos and escaping from the palace. Now, in fairness to Magnus, during this battle, Big E did give him the opportunity to come back to the side of the Imperium, saying he would give him a new legion if he gave up his current sons. At this point, a way back to his father's side was the thing that Magnus wanted most, and yet he refused it out of loyalty to his sons, saying that even if he had been asked to give up a single one, the price would still be too high. After the battle within the throne room, the Thousand Suns were fully committed to Horus's cause, and enacted a ritual within the Webway to sap the Emperor's power, though this would fail when Magnus again got stunted on by Vulcan. Following the defeat of Horus at the hands of Big E, the Thousand Suns retreated from Terra, using their powers to open a warp route directly to the Planet of Sorcerers, instead of faffing about with that whole scouring business that the other legions got stuck in. Their dedication to Tzeentch in the aftermath of the heresy changed little for the Thousand Suns. They remained arrogant and hubristic space wizards with a vaguely Egyptian flavour. What did change things for the Legion was the Rubric of Ahriman. As the Thousand Suns retreated from Terra, the Flesh Change returned with a vengeance, and Magnus did not seem too interested in doing anything to fix it following his ascent to demonhood. Instead, Ahriman, now the most powerful sorcerer remaining to the Legion, gathered a conclave of his most trusted sorcerers, and together they cast a spell known as the Rubric of Ahriman, in an attempt to save the Legion from the rampant mutations. Which, to be fair, it did do. The most psychically powerful of the Legion grew even more powerful following the Rubric, and were now free from the flesh change, though those who were less gifted instead had their physical bodies reduced to dust, and their spirits trapped inside their armour forever. Most of the Legion were therefore changed into Rubric Marines, now little more than mindless automatons under the control of the most powerful sorcerers, and who can be pretty easily defeated by a small hoover. Interestingly, the effects of the Rubric seem to have reached through all of space and time, leading to some sorcerers digging up long-lost Heresy-era battlegrounds in search of more Rubric Marines. It also makes Blood Ravens being Thousand Sons successors unlikely. I like the idea that they're word-bearers for various narrative and thematic reasons, but that's a topic for another video, I think. When Magnus learned about the Rubric, he banished Ahriman and his Cabal from the planet of the Sorcerers, and now they wander the galaxy in search of a way to reverse the Rubric, as well as a library card. Like many of the traitor legions, the Thousand Sons would later split apart in their entirety into a number of small warbands that each seek to further the plans of the Lord of Change in their own small ways. Most of these warbands carry a grudge against the Space Wolves, and have on several occasions sought to destroy the Good Boys, along with their home planet of Fenris. So that was the Thousand Sons, the 15th Legion of Space Marines. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much, it really does mean a lot. Please like, subscribe, all the rest, and I'll see you all in the next video, the Christmas special.